Gentlemen, the time has come once again to discuss things.
Hi everyone, welcome to another episode of Geeky Gentlemen. I'm Sid Part 2, joined me today is...
Not fucking spiders, apparently. Oh my god.
So good. Dude, the Australians are a beautiful people. Not
Are they,
the Aboriginals, specifically the white Australian population.
Oh my god. No thank you.
Ugh, they're hilarious, Steve. Like, it takes a certain kind of madness to want to live in that country. To not just run away screaming, and I think it breeds the funniest people on the fucking planet.
Evolution hit different over there.
It really did, man. Oh. I don't know, maybe the Aboriginals are even more hilarious, but I just don't understand what they're saying. We'll go with that.
It's like Boomhauer on King of the Hill. Like, I'm sure he means something, but I don't get it.
Yeah, exactly. 100%. Anyway, so today we're not here to talk about the Australians, but how fucking great a podcast would that be?
It's Australia. What's tomorrow's topic? Australians. Them and their fucking kangaroos.
I remember fucking years
What the fuck
ago.
is a wombat anyway?
Right? I made my fucking movie, and there's a scene where someone talks about getting kicked in the chest by a kangaroo, and I remember like playing it online for a bunch of people, and a dude that was in the room was actually an Australian, and he goes, "No, that's legitimately a problem. Like, people actually go to the hospital because they get kicked in the chest by a fucking kangaroo."
That's insane.
Anyway, no, not Australia today, but maybe one day when the Geeky Gentleman decides to get its balls back. But today we're here to discuss just a topic that's kind of been on the periphery of my mind as of late, and that's just the procedural, formulaic murder mystery show. Now these often, but not 100% of the time, involve police and cops and that whole side of things. Sometimes you'll get ones that are a little more creative and just do like a private investigator or some kind of like supernatural thing. But like, I'd say a good 85% of these fucking things that I want to talk about that use this very particular formula of storytelling for a television broadcast are just focused on cops. And I guess the main reason I wanted to talk about this is I wondered if there is a reason that the story formula itself is so attractive to a general audience, or is it just that they're all propaganda? Because I bear absolutely no delusions about the fact that a lot of them are propaganda. And I'm in this weird place where I'm like, yeah, but I like it. So I just kind of wanted to dive in and talk about it because it's just an interesting thing to me.
So we should probably start with the elephant in the room, but I kind of want to dial it back just a sec because the propaganda thing is certainly a topic that has intensified the last 3 or 4 years. But before we even get to that, the idea of why are all of these so popular, or why is this kind of a standard formula is interesting in and of itself, right? Because you got to think about like the invention of television and not just television, but like the slow, grindy evolution from variety shows to scripted television to serialized as opposed to episodic, and how the idea of like a cop show is perfectly in every one of those developmental histories. To a certain extent, the difference between like Dragnet and Star Trek in the 60s is really just one is set in space and one is set in, I think, LA. I haven't watched Dragnet in like 20 years because I'm not 80 years old, but it's effectively the same
I've
thing.
never even heard of it.
No, it's that stupid cop show where the guy like interviews the suspects, and then like the victim will like go into some kind of emotional detail about what happened to them, and Dragnet would just cut him off and be like, "Just the facts, ma'am," or something like that. Like it was one of those old shows. But anyway, the idea of just being like early scripted television was, for better or worse, very, very, very similar if it wasn't just a comedy. Because like, you had a lot of variety when it came to like sitcoms and stuff. Like sitcoms are probably the oldest form of like televised entertainment there really is. But with like cop shows and sci-fi shows and stuff like that, it was always the sort of basic premise of you have a sort of central body that has some kind of job. They enter into a situation where they have one of two options, and then it ends with them taking a third option. It's a very sort of like basic plot, and Star Trek ran this into the ground in TNG, and in TOS, but especially in TNG. But when you get to like cop shows, it's so easy to just be like, I don't have the money for space or makeup and stuff. Let's just get a bunch of guys in suits running around city streets, and they're just following leads, and he cuts off perfectly before commercial breaks, and we do all these twists, and we don't have to worry about censorship because this is the police, therefore good guys. We don't actually have to show the crime, we can just investigate the crime. Eventually you go from like your Dragnets to like your Law and Orders, where there is a more ongoing story in the background with the characters, all the way up until you get to something like True Detective, where one entire season is just one mystery the whole time. But like it's so easy to be like, every development in television has its quintessential cop show in a way where I don't think any other genre of TV works that way, because so many just kind of get invented as the format evolves. But cop shows have been around as long as sitcoms, man. It's really funny.
It is, and I don't know, like there's just, the formula is just so basic that I've gotten like older and more sophisticated. I could just see it, and like it still works on me, but I'm like more aware of what it's doing. Like the thing that's just the most, the real world, this does not happen thing, right? Is the cops have cornered me. They've explained that they know it's me, but they don't have any proof yet. But then they get me angry, and I just explain the whole thing and how I did it, and I confess in front of all these witnesses, and then I, just to really, like, screw myself over, I take somebody hostage at the time, right? It's so cheap, and, like, I really like I like it when the writers become aware of the formula and start to have fun with it. So, my best example of that, like, massive cliche in the procedural formula is an episode of Monk, which of course is rife with those. Out of curiosity, I rewatched the first episode of Monk, and that's exactly how that one ends. Is he corners him, gets him into a thing, and then the guy just starts ranting in front of like everybody when he could have just shut up and they probably wouldn't have been able to actually prove anything. But there's an episode of Monk that starts with the like explanation and the wrap up, and the guy is literally about to confess, and what it is he's a sculptor, and he like got in a yelling match with I think it's like his wife or something, and he pushed her into his sculpture and she cracked her head on it and died. And to remove the evidence, he took his sculpture and took his jackhammer to it and completely destroyed the whole thing and spread it out on his driveway. And Monk realized it because he realized it was new gravel and it's such a fine material you wouldn't really make gravel out of it. Yeah. So it's like, that's the start of the episode, is all this evidence is just poured out. And the guy opens his mouth to admit to what happens. And then his lawyer, Jay fucking Moore, shows up and says, don't say another goddamn word. But Jay, but they've got all these evidence. They don't have shit. And then the whole episode is just about the, like, fucking court case of trying to prove that this guy did this murder in the way that Monk said it, because he's got a lawyer that actually told his client to shut the fuck up.
No.
It's such a good episode, man.
Dude, that's a great segue, because the quintessential thing about a lot of these cop shows as they evolve is that you're rooting for the cops to solve the crime because basic societal law says crime bad. But also, if you like really sit down and watch what they're doing, this is some insane, illegal shit, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, it's the most intense coercion you've ever seen. Like, so I've just started rewatching White Collar because I like White Collar. It's a lot of fun. And there's an episode where a guy is running a mortgage fraud scheme. And the idea is basically just that he targets people that don't have any extended family, so he could forge their signatures on second mortgages for houses. And when they foreclose, he basically resells them, makes money, yada, yada, yada. But the idea behind the episode is he's doing this to amass all this money so that he could get a kidney transplant. And he's got a rare specific condition that requires a transplant that has zero mismatch or he could die. And so the way they catch him is they drug him, make him think that he is about to die of renal failure in a hospital bed in India, and force him to confront the fact that they're just going to let him die until he confesses. And then he does, and they reveal it was just staged the whole time.
That's so fucked up.
Like, that's insane! It's the craziest thing I've ever seen!
It is. Like, and, you know, it's funny because there is that element of propaganda. Even when I like the show, I can recognize when it's doing it because it's just... Part of it's propaganda and part of it is just the draw of fiction is... It is good writing on a fundamental level to put your characters in situations where there's no easy answer, and so they have to do something dramatic to get the result to win the day. Right? That is just fundamentally, that is good writing. And I'm not sure how much of it is propaganda, how much of it is people just don't think enough about what they're showcasing as quote-unquote okay behavior for the police. So there's another episode of Monk. I think it's like one of the finale episodes when like Monk's in some trouble.
Rake USA TV shows through the coals.
I mean, it's fucking all over the place,
it's their whole
right?
channel.
It is. But like there's this, it's one of the finale episodes, and like the big there's this guy that's not fallen for any of the typical police procedure interrogation moves, and they really need some information out of him. And Staldemeyer, the detective friend that's been there the whole time, right? He's like, you know, I've been around a long time. It used to be if someone wouldn't talk, you just take a phone book to them. But phone books aren't a thing anymore. They're too old-fashioned. We don't use those. And then it just cuts, and he's like carrying a fucking broken laptop into the into the rest of the department. And he's like, "I've got the information." Like, he beat the shit out of this dude with a laptop, and it's like framed as this great, you know, huge character moment. And on purely on a writing standpoint, it is good character writing. It is good, like, interesting thing. But he's a fucking cop. That's not okay.
Yeah. The sort of, like, catch-22 of this whole thing... Well, maybe catch-22 is not even the right word. But, like, the sort of challenge of this whole thing is that I think the propaganda criticism is a bit overstated and deployed a bit more maliciously than it ought to be. Because the idea at the end of the day is not that there is some kind of systemic conspiracy by cable companies to make everyone think that the police are good guys, therefore they greenlight nothing but good cop shows. Like, that's not really the thing. It's more mundane than that. It's just that cop shows are really easy to write, They require you to go through much fewer hurdles in terms of cooperation from other people, specifically because if you tell a city that, like, you want to film a cop show here, they're not going to say no. You didn't, in the old days, you didn't have to deal with the same levels of censorship. It perfectly conforms to how cable TV airs. It doesn't require you to have extensive long-term contracts with all your actors because it's a police precinct. People come in and out all the time. You could keep it running indefinitely. As long as you premise the show on a specific city or a specific location, you don't need anything outside of that. Like, that's why Law and Order works, is that it's Law and Order, and there's a bunch of spinoffs, and the cast changes all the time, and it doesn't matter because it's a very fundamental premise. As long as you have, like, the hook, which is, like, it's either SVU or, like, the legal version or whatever, it doesn't matter what you do with it. And so, because it's so easy to make an entire empire out of cop shows, people just tend to do it more often. Like, Dick Wolf did it twice between Law and Order and the Chicago stuff. Like, that's all it is. So, on the one hand, you've got this problem of there are far too many cop shows making the police look great because there's just so much of that impression that the general public has that it confuses their idea of what is and isn't legal. But on the other hand, it's like you said, on a fundamental level, good writing is making your audience feel sympathy for the central characters. And so, if you position the cops as the main characters, then those are the people you feel sympathy for. And good cop shows kind of ebb and flow between this, and they'll, like, talk about some of the more complicated ethics of what's going on. Like, True Detective is a really good example of this. Fargo is a really good example of this. But more often than not, it's just like what old mystery novels were back in the day. They're essentially just kind of disposable entertainment where you could just turn on any individual episode any day of the week, watch a mystery from beginning to end, and sort of feel entertained by it. And it's not really designed to do much more than that unless you're talking about, like, one of the prestige shows on HBO. And so, like, there's definitely this ongoing societal issue of, like, what exactly is our public perception of cops and what is legal? Like, the whole they need to stay on the phone a certain number of times before we could track them. Or, like, you can't report a person missing until it's been 24 hours. Like, or the way they read the Miranda rights on TV is not the way they're actually supposed to be read. Like, all of these, like, little things that add to your misconceptions about what police are is a larger social problem. But it's not really a problem with any one individual series. Some shows are worse about this than others. But more often than not, it is just kind of adhering to the idea of, like, this is a very stable, easy job. Like, what rom-coms used to be for Hollywood is what cop shows are for TV. They are there to get pumped out regularly to supply the backbone of funding for other things.
Mm-hmm. And, you know, it's funny because they just are so ubiquitous and all over the place. Is this TikTok creator I like, Korean Beef 27, I think the name is. And he did a thing of, like, why you watch anime? Why don't you watch more, like, adult shows for, you know, adults? And he's like, all the adult television I see. I'm a detective, but I work in New York. I'm a detective, but I'm from Chicago. I'm a detective, but I'm also the devil. And he just fucking kept going. And I'm like, yep. No, it's so true. It's so ubiquitous. It's so just, like, prevalent everywhere. And I think this is, like, completely unsubstantiable, right? But I think everyone has, like, one of these that they like. Like, even people who think they're above it, like, Sherlock fucking took off like a goddamn rocket. And it's brilliant and it's smart in some ways, but in other ways, it's the same fucking shit.
Oh yeah,
you know?
Sherlock Holmes is the original, right? Like, that's what Sherlock Holmes novels are.
Sure, but, like, Sherlock as a series, the BBC Sherlock, it's just the same thing. It's just in a more prestige, longer format. It's got, like, essentially the IP behind it. I don't know if that's the same thing with a publicly owned character or not, but whatever.
Just the name recognition,
it's just,
yeah.
Yeah, it's got like some other stuff going for it, but at the end of the day, it is exactly the same. You get to the same fucking scenes where Sherlock does the whole mystery, wraps it all up, explains everything, and then the person fucking confesses. It's just done in a more clever Stephen Moffat-y way. It's got like just different trappings, but it's the same shit.
Well, I mean, and arguably, you have the other Sherlock Holmes TV show that got started at the exact same time that is also arguably more popular and more formulaic, which is Elementary. If you remember
I
that
keep
fucking
forgetting
show.
that exists.
Right? Like,
what was Lucy Liu doing? She was better than that show.
I did not like that show very much, but that's a rare opinion because a lot of people love Elementary and a lot of people thought it was better than Sherlock, which I think is crazy. But still, it's one of those things where, like, at the same time as Sherlock, Elementary was going on. One was the British prestige TV show about a detective solving murders, and the other was the American, but, like, they were effectively the same show.
Elementary American drama series.
It lasted
7
seasons. Yeah, it went for
Holy
a long
shit.
time. It literally just ended a couple years ago, I think.
What was Lucy Liu doing? You're better than this, Lucy Liu. You deserve
But no,
better.
but like, to your point, right? Like, Sherlock Holmes short stories are not necessarily the originator, but one of the earliest examples of disposable detective fiction that was very easily circulated and became widely popular because it was just one and done mysteries that didn't require any continuity. It was completely in today's terms episodic, and it's very easy to adapt those kinds of things. And when you look at early film, it's the same way. They're adapting dime store detective novels in large part because they're cheap and easy to put out. And then this comes full circle when you have 2 Sherlock Holmes TV shows doing the exact same thing today in the form of cable police TV shows.
And it's funny because the other thing that like put this in my mind besides USA and Lucifer was I was talking to somebody at work who was going through all the Detective Conan movies.
Oh god.
Yeah, and I'm like, Jesus fucking Christ, Japan, way to just do the most anime thing ever of, okay, it's a teenager that solves mysteries. I guess no, he got turned into a child through... What the fuck? I just fucking lost it at that. Apparently that shit is still going. I found this out.
Yes, it is.
That manga is still going. It's been like over 20 years. And I asked the friend at work that's watching through the movies, and she goes, yeah, it's about a year's passed in time in the fucking book. And I'm like... he's going to be a child forever. Like, he could have just naturally aged back beyond where he started at this point.
No, bro, fucking Case Closed, I'm pretty sure has more individual chapters than One Piece at this point.
Like, it does.
It's insane, man. He literally could have aged well beyond what he was downgraded by if you just said that he, like, a week passed between chapters. It's insane.
Oh. That's so fucking funny. And, like, I was talking about, like, this fucking... Because, like, the whole bit in that one is to explain the cases, he always has to make the other detective who's a goddamn clown. Like, he has to poison dart him unconscious and then explain the murder, and I'm like... if you keep doing that to someone, they're probably either going to, like, build up an immunity or, like, develop an allergy to the thing or something. Like, shouldn't he just die? Shouldn't Jimmy Kudo have to, like, cover up a murder? Wouldn't that be a fucking twist for the series? Fucking, I swear to God, that shit just killed me. I'm like, I remember I watched Case Closed when it was originally airing on Adult Swim. When they tried the dub and it just didn't really take off here in the States. And I remember like, this is so fucking cool. Just the mysteries. And it's an anime too. And he fucking like kicked the globe like it was a soccer ball at that guy. It was so sick. And I adored it, right? It was cool. It was fun. And I think you're right. I think it is the fact that they're so disposable. They're like a comfort food. Is
100%.
What keeps people coming back to them so much. And like the fact that you have like such a safe and reliable, a tried and true formula to structure everything around, I think lets you do some really cool, really fun character stuff. Like, I really like Lucifer. I went through it and I watched it all. I'm like, man, I don't even want to read the comic because I know it's probably going to be better, but I just like my trash the way I like my trash. I went through and I watched it all, and like, it's funny because the draw of it is like, okay, I guess he's like solving murders or whatever, but I'm more interested in all like the, heaven and hell shit. And as it goes on, honestly, they just don't have the budget, clearly, to do as much of the heaven and hell shit as they kept trying to as it went on. And they were just better off doing the fucking one-and-done murder mysteries some of the time. Not that it wasn't interesting, not that it wasn't fun, but, like, it's... I don't remember... I don't think I could properly summarize everything that happened with Lucifer's twin brother in season 4 of that show. But you know what I can fucking tell you about is the episode where the guy is in his hell loop, but you don't know until the end of the episode because it's just him fucking around LA.
Well, no, so like look at Lucifer, right? Look at Lucifer as a concept for a TV show. You've got the IP association in the form of Lucifer the comic book, which is right at the height of comic book movies becoming really big in the Arrowverse. You have a supernatural element that's big for its general parent network, which became the CW because of shows like Supernatural, Buffy, and Angel, and Vampire Diaries. And then you have it's a procedural cop show. Like at the end of the day, every era has its markers and what makes it special and what stands out and what the transition points are. And at the center of all of them is a cop show that just does that. What was Angel if not a cop show in season 1? What was Supernatural if not basically a cop show for a little while? What really was like Monk and Burn Notice and White Collar and Suits, except the same show repackaged with different professions.
I'm still salty to this day that the closest we got to a crossover episode of Monk and Psych was that one commercial.
Oh, that would have been so funny, man.
I mean, it's not even like it would have been that hard. They were in the same state, Steve. They were a couple cities apart.
Psych keeps getting movies, too, but, like, there's nothing for Monk as far as a revival goes. Which is probably for the best, but I want it.
Yeah. No, I mean, I heard someone with severe OCD that they considered Monk, like, the most offensive show on the planet. I'm like, well, that's really interesting, and I'm sorry, but I think you might be too close to the issue and may have misinterpreted the television show. I'm sorry. I'm gonna throw down on that one. I'm not gonna say that it's the best representation people with OCD could ever hope for, but it's pretty fucking good drama, and I'm sorry that you can't take a couple jokes at your expense.
Well, and like, have we come very far when you look at Monk versus today's thing that everyone's upset about, which is The Good Doctor and its representation of autism? It really feels like we're just circling the same problem over and over again.
See, and I feel like I've heard differing things from people on that, of like whether or not The Good Doctor is good representation. It's probably like varies episode to episode, I betcha.
It's that's the thing. It's like any TV show. It's founded on a premise that is probably an oversimplification, and sometimes it's probably entertaining and sometimes it's not. But the only people having that conversation are trapped on Twitter and don't account for the 80 million people watching the show.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. I don't know. I've not watched The Good Doctor. Medical drama doesn't really do it for me, except for House, which is Sherlock Holmes, but he's a doctor.
Well, no, exactly. It's the same fucking premise over and over again. I can't rewatch House. I tried. I can't. It's so cringe.
Really? Why?
It's just the more you get on House's level, to a certain extent, for lack of a better word, the more you realize that he's not actually smart, he's just full of shit. Like, the more you watch the first couple of seasons and you, like, hear him annoy patients that are, like, Christian because he's an atheist, or you hear him talk about being rational versus emotional, or, like, you hear him cite things, the more you realize, oh, he doesn't know what the fuck he's talking about on any of these, and it just becomes unwatchable for me. Like, there's an entire episode where, like, he goes back and forth with about a patient that's, like, super religious and he's not, and he just doesn't understand it, and he keeps trying to poke holes in his faith, and I'm just like, these are things that, like, a 12-year-old could dismantle. What is your deal that you were arguing about this? Did you read nothing in medical school?
No, he only read medical textbooks, and so he has no interest in reading anything else.
It's just funny. It's one of those things where it's like, clearly this is what dumb people think smart people sound like.
And it was a very successful television show until Lin-Manuel Miranda came on for an episode and they rapped together. That's where I jumped off the boat right there on House.
It's a very strange show.
I remember someone told me, Lin-Manuel Miranda, you might know him because he was in like an episode of House. I'm like, he was? Yeah, they're in like a mental institution together and they like did a rap. Yeah, that's what I stopped watching. that was when it was bad.
That was after he drove his car into his boss's house.
Yep.
Good times.
Good fucking show.
That's
good fucking times.
Weird fucking show. I do want to talk about while we're here, the comfort food nature, because the comfort food is 90% of the appeal, right? Like, you sit down and you watch, like, Law & Order or CSI or whatever after you get home for work for the same reason that you come home and open a beer, or you watch Family Guy, or you watch Wheel of Fortune, or, like, any number of insert mind-numbing habit here, where it doesn't require a great deal of thought. It keeps you entertained. You could look at your phone and scroll while it's going on in the background. You could have a conversation. You're not really missing
anything of substance.
Yeah, you could like invite friends over and just have it on in the background all day. Like that's what I used to do with Law and Order. Like it's just one of those things where it's like it's easy and it's lazy. But even if you pay attention, right? Like even if you're like invested in it, it's a very sort of like intentionally shallow experience where like no one episode is any more unique than any other. It's a formula, but you get enough into it where it's just entertaining and you can kind of remember like, oh, this is the episode where this happens. This is the episode where this happens. And it's designed specifically for that crowd. It's designed for that 9 to 5 crowd that wants to come home and watch something shitty before they go to bed. And there's definitely nothing wrong with that. But the best versions of these kinds of shows are the ones that kind of understand that they are these weird guilty pleasure comfort foods and are able to do something with that in ways that are fun or clever. Brooklyn Nine-Nine, before it decided to end because everyone started talking about propaganda online, was a fun show for that very reason, where it was just like, what if the cops in your local precinct were actually good at their job and nice people? And it's really just a sitcom about solving murders. That was a fun and entertaining show. But like on a more serious side of it, like I talk a lot about Ed Brubaker's Reckless books, and I wrote a whole thing. It was a 2-part article about how Reckless as a period piece private eye series is kind of the ultimate comfort food for 3 years of a pandemic, and how the whole series is just designed on, it's easy to understand, it's clear, it's concise, it's got a very apparent structure, but it's always just coasting on that emotional surface level of we're all kind of inevitably heading towards the same conclusion, so let's just kind of enjoy the bumps along the way. And I think that's fine. I think that's entertaining, and you can do it really well. Columbo is the other really good example of this.
Fucking God, Columbo's
like, so good!
If not for the 70s pacing of it, I would just eat Columbo up with a fucking spoon. It's a very slow burn kind of thing because it's the 70s and everything like had to take 20 minutes to do an establishing shot. But like, man, he just has so much fucking character to him. Just the fact that like Columbo's catchphrase is just one more question. Yeah, just one more thing. It's bugging me. Like, it's so good.
And Columbo, like, and we haven't like gotten into the weeds of it, but like there are whodunits, which are murder mysteries that follow a detective up until the denouement where they explain how the bad guy did their thing. And then there are howdunnits, which are where you see the crime as it occurs, and you watch the detective be the point of view character, piece it together in front of you, and that was what Columbo was. And more recently, Rian Johnson's Poker Face follows that formula, where every episode opens with the crime, and then you flash back to the detective character who like slowly pieces it together through their incidental encounters with the people involved in the crime. And that's a really good way to keep that formula fresh and entertaining, because if it really is just like this sort of omnipotent detective character who's piecing all this together in a way that your mind can't organically follow without some kind of explanation vehicle like Watson. And then doing it the other way, where you're looking for the clues because you're ahead of them, keeps the experience a lot more engaging, and that's part of why Columbo was so much fun, where you were just kind of like here for his disarming personality. You knew the road he needed to go, and every time he picked up on one of the clues you already saw, it just felt so satisfying.
It is, though.
Like, it really is.
There really is something to it. It's just like, yes, good. It fucking like rings the endorphin bell in the brain.
It's a dopamine hit, man. When Columbo shows up, it just explains shit. Like, it feels good.
You know what it reminds me of is like not the book itself. I don't know if this is in the book. I just remember this very particular thing of a film adaptation of Fahrenheit 451, which is the series about how the state was trying to keep everyone stupid and they're like burning books and shit. And it's just this fucking moment where they're sitting down to watch TV and like the hosts on the TV would just stop him, and his girlfriend's name was Linda, would just stop and like look at the camera and say, "Isn't that right, Linda?" And there'd be like a red light beeping and waiting for her to respond, and she'd like in a trance say, "Yes, that's right." And then they'd like go back to their conversation. And for one, the thing that has always fascinated me about that is like, how the fuck do you film something like that? But for two, it's just the fact that like, if that is not just the epitome of brainless television, I don't know what is, because it's just so like fundamental of like, here's the moment, here's waiting, here's the canned laughter, here's the part where we wait for you to respond. And it's funny because like children's television just, I don't know if evolved or devolved is the right word here, but just kind of became that, starting with like your Dora the Explorer and stuff, where she's like, "Can you find this on the map?" It's like, it's right fucking there, Dora. Of course you can find it. Why you need to ask them? But you know what? It works because I watch my kid do it, man. I watch Leah. She'll like, we'll put something on like that on occasion, and she'll legit say, "There it is." I'm like, "Yep, all right, there it is." And I think it's slightly more dressed up when you talk about something like a Columbo or like a Criminal Minds, right? Where you're like, you see the crime happen. Some of the episodes you follow the killer the whole fucking time. You're just waiting for the goddamn team to find them, and then when they finally do, it's like, whew, finally, thank God.
No, I mean it's 100% that, right? Like, what is Law and Order? I keep picking on Law and Order because that's the one I watch the most, really. But what is Law and Order if not Dora the Explorer with extra steps? Like, that's kind of all it is.
I fucking loved I think it was College Humor did the bit where they went through all the beats of an episode of Law and Order, but they just had all the characters like expressly talk about what they were doing. And my favorite was, "Well, let me just continue to casually do my job as I sit here and talk to police about how I might be a suspect in an ongoing investigation." It's just
there is
it's so on point, though.
There is one thing I noticed about post-West Wing era TV that's always annoyed me, that I can't ever unsee, and I never see anyone like properly make fun of it. But it's something I notice every time I watch a TV show and it annoys the crap out of me, which is, ever since we invented the idea of walk and talk, no human being ever enters a room in a TV show with the intention of doing anything in that room except walking out. It's insane. Like, the second you start watching, that's always how the episode plays, where it's just like, I'm going to walk in and talk at you, and now we are going to leave. Forget any reason why anyone would be in this room for any amount of time. It's so fucking strange.
Yeah, like, that'd be such a good, like, trope breaker kind of moment of just, all right, now let's go. Sorry, I've got to wait for this to finish. It's like, you're in, like, the fucking crime lab or something. It's time sensitive. I can't just leave it. If I leave it, it's going to be destroyed, and it's very crucial to another investigation that I'm doing. But the killer's there right now. Yeah, but we've got, like, 50 uniformed police officers that can go with you. I'm the only one that's qualified for this part. Honestly, I'm a fucking, like, technician. I shouldn't even be out in the field unless it's to, like, a closed crime scene. When you think about it, it's kind of irresponsible. I don't have the training to be...
Well, and my favorite is, like, when you have the character or the episode thing take place in, like, locations that are clearly really far apart. So, like, the Arrowverse is a great example of this, of, like, you literally drove all the way downtown from your manor secluded in the suburbs just so you could enter a room and leave. Like, that's insane. Why is no one thinking
phone call
about
would have
this?
sufficed. A simple phone call would have sufficed.
Literally, it's insane.
I mean, I think that's just a general thing for, like, television and movies and, like, suspension disbelief stuff, because
Oh yeah.
I love it when stuff points it out, though. It is really funny, like, why couldn't we have talked about all this in the car on the way over? You know, like, that's always a good one.
No, another unsung rule about TV is that cars are for transitions. No one actually talks in those things. It would not work if they did.
No, but they do. They do have conversations in the car, but only when something dramatic needs to happen for them to stop the car.
Otherwise,
that's the important detail. Yep. Otherwise, they just drive quietly, texting on their phones or something. You know. It's so funny. Like, and I don't want to keep distracting by just talking about, like, tropisms and stuff. But it is just hilarious, man.
It's really funny.
Yeah. Oh, man, I fucking love it so much. Wait, is Alfie here?
Hello.
He's just
Alfie's
been
late
for 40 minutes.
So what this trope would be is I'm the guest character that shows up specifically for, like, the season finale, but then gets really popular and they have to make a season regular after that. But because the actor's famous, they can't book it in time. So just sporadically, I'll be like, "Oh, they're in, like, a case off screen, or they're in a coma," but then but now they're fine. So that's me in this situation.
Alfie.
We can't afford British people on our show.
Exactly.
Yeah,
it's just the legal fees alone.
The Tea and Crumpet production. We don't have the infrastructure for that over here in the States. Alfie, you've come late, so I guess I'll just ask you, because we were kind of talking about this, of, like, everyone's got their just, like, one fucking garbage TV procedural murder mystery show. What's yours?
It's tough because I've never really checked them out, but a lot of my family is really into them, and the UK as a whole, UK television is kind of built on the back of the procedural. Detective fiction, since Conan Doyle, has kind of, like, been our version of the superhero. So everything is kind of about either a local police crimes unit or a disgruntled detective or a elaborate detective. That ranges from Agatha Christie to something as simple as, like, mystery dramas happening. Midsummer Murders, for example, is a show that's been going on since the 60s and has, like, endured on the simple premise of, yeah, it's actually crazy how there's more violent crime in, like, rural scenic areas than there is in the big cities. Let's make a show about that. And the UK's, like, really kind of thrived off that. Out of those, the one that's been my favorite, and I'll make sure I get the name of it because I think it's the
Fucking shows up late and isn't even prepared.
Yeah, because I just forget the name because you brought it up. I wasn't expecting to answer that question. But I'll just whatever show Perot was on. It was basically a spin-off where we would adapt Agatha Christie novels with Detective Perot, but we'd make up new ones as
funny.
well. So, like, we just made it into a show basically where it was Poirot was just going around solving stuff. And I always tend to like crime that has a protagonist but it's only the lone protagonist. I don't like the supporting cast. I think that can get overstuffed and it can drag up scenes that could be delivered, because ideally in a crime mystery you want it to be more episodic, where every week there's a new situation, and for that you want to introduce a bunch of new suspects. And the issue you have is you have a large rotating cast, is now your regulars are competing for screen time with the new entries. But at the same time, if you make it a long-running TV show and you don't have a supporting cast that's paid on a regular basis to appear in regular episodes, that's very difficult to cast and very difficult to like set up. So like it's hard to make those shows compelling in that way. But the Poirot Adventures always seem to get away with it. Is sometimes they would reuse actors, but they'd always be in different roles. But the lone person who'd stay along would be Poirot, and I really like that format.
Speaking of British TV, though, they do definitely have this weird edge compared to the US counterparts, where, and Ian and I were talking about this before, where like because it's such a basic formula, it's very easy to just like lean into it and do nothing but the same thing over and over again, a la like Chicago PD or NCIS or something. Or you could use the formula to your advantage and start seeding in the crumbs of something more interesting, more like a serialized TV show. And Luther is a really good example of that. I'm not a big fan of Luther, to be honest. But Idris Elba as the main character in that show, just being a completely unhinged detective with a strong ongoing mystery to back up what's going on in like more episodic stuff, that's really interesting. Also, I have no idea how your guys' court system works over there, so I can only imagine that what Luther does is about as unethical as a typical American cop, but I can't judge it quite as harshly because I actually know the laws here.
It's actually really funny how kind of like strict the English television is about that, but they it's also kind of like, because our legal system is very different to yours, where in the US you could make the argument that the crimes in fiction are often more sanitized and not as violent and drastic as is in real life crime, or specifically in terms of like police brutality and stuff like that. Some of the detectives, the things they do are actually less corrupt than in England. It's the opposite, where they have like a power fantasy where, because they are so neutered, whereas we're not allowed to carry guns, and very much the level of crime is still, you know, still very violent crimes, but it's not to the because it's such a small country, it's not to the same extent. The TV shows really like to amp it up as if like this is what it's really like, because they want people to join, they want people to have like propaganda, and it's like, oh, so the average policeman with a bobby stick has to somehow be an action hero, so they'll like make him into fucking Hawkeye, where he can like snipe people across the room by throwing the stick.
So what you're saying is that like the premise of every British cop show is, what if you were a cop in the US? Dun, dun,
yeah,
dun.
Pretty much. It's very US heavy envy, which is interesting because they always have the episode with the Americans come on and they're like, they're so bad at this. They're so inefficient compared to us. We're so much better. Like, it's everyone has like the American cop comes over, or the American inspector or whatever, and it's like he's a joke or he's a fool or something like that. And it's without fail is when you're like, you guys are just desperately trying to cosplay this. Why are you being so judgmental?
It's so funny.
I love it. I love it. I love it so much. I don't know, that's interesting, because I liked Luther quite a bit, just because the idea that he's the detective whose best friend is the serial killer he put away. It's so fucking good. And not like they were friends and then he put her away and then they became friends is so fucking fun to me. I give no fucks. Steve, whatever problems you have with Luther, you were wrong, sir.
I didn't say I had problems with it. I just said it wasn't my thing.
I think this is just your racism creeping out again.
It's true. Yeah. I am against mentally unstable women.
Yeah, yes, 100%. That is the most Steve Baxi statement I've ever heard. Steve Baxi, opposes mentally unstable women. He opposes them so much that he feels the need to just bed them and rid them of their worldly woes.
I can fix them. Sorry. One more British show, and this might be a good segue into another topic that you both will have a lot more to say on, which is Broadchurch. Have you guys ever watched Broadchurch?
Nope.
Broadchurch is that I don't know if it's necessarily right to call it short-lived because it lasted a long time, but only because it took so fucking long to get the seasons out.
Yeah.
But it's that short/long-lived David Tennant procedural cop show from the UK, where he's basically just doing a Luther, honestly. Like, that's what that show is, minus the serial killer best friend, but it's basically David Tennant pulling an Idris Elba. And it's a really good show, but I found it really interesting that David Tennant leaves Doctor Who, gets some good acclaimed work here and there, and decides to hitch his wagon to a prestige TV show, playing a character that has nowhere near the recognizability of a doctor, but almost seemingly on purpose. Like, the idea that anyone could play the gruff, I'm too old for this shit detective is almost sort of the point of that as a career move, because it allows him to kind of shed that persona a bit and do something that is really mundane or really predictable, that really has no expectations behind it at all. Like, a good cop show is slightly better than 90% of TV, and a bad cop show is 90% of TV. Like, there's no losing in that situation. So I find it interesting when, not only when like big name people do stuff like that, like your Matthew McConaughey's and Woody Harrelson's in True Detective, but also when the opposite becomes true, where known, recognizable, and unique things decide to just become cop shows for a little bit because it's easier. Like, for example, Doctor Who, when the Third Doctor takes over, where it is basically in that same sort of procedural format.
It is. It's a little bit more than that. It's funny watching all of John Pertwee's era now, because it's so known for, like, it's the Doctor stranded on Earth and he's just stuck with UNIT. And, like, yeah, that's definitely a big part of it, but also, like, here's the weird thing. So we all watched the Three Doctors together. That's the one where he gets the knowledge to use the TARDIS again.
Right.
And you have a whole season of John Pertwee traveling around using the TARDIS. And I think there's maybe like 1 or 2 stories on Earth with UNIT in that season. Okay? But here's the other thing. Before he gets the knowledge, he still goes on space adventures while he's working for UNIT. Because the whole time he's trying to, like, fix the TARDIS, and that is, on a surface level, a very good excuse for why he's not traveling and why they don't have to build all these sets and make all these costumes. But, like, instead of just relying on that 100%, they do legit just have him like, all right, man, I'm sure I've got it working now. And they actually leave, and then it just turns out the Time Lord sent him there to go deal with it. Because his whole thing as the second Doctor is, well, there's evil in the universe, and someone's got to be out there to stop it. And they're like, all right, I guess fine, we'll be a little bit more involved. You're exiled until we don't feel like it anymore. And then we're just going to send you over here to fucking fix this problem. So, you know, it's interesting how the formula is, like, so synonymous with Pertwee's era, even though that's not necessarily the reality of his era, which is kind of fascinating to me.
What you go along with that, because that's kind of a format that fit the longer episode structure, because we just make more episodes back in the day. I think the difference that's very kind of exemplified the most by just UK versus US procedural dramas is the episode count. Is you mentioned Broadchurch, Steve, and that's kind of the primo example of, like, here's a very short, I think it's like 6 episodes a season or something along that line.
Yeah.
It's not very long. Sherlock was 3 episodes a season. And then you have, on the flip side, most American shows will be like the 22 episode season or the 24 episode season. Very rarely, unless it's a Netflix thing, or you get something that's less than 13. And I think that's interesting. What do you guys like? How do you think that affects the format? Because I think with mystery shows specifically, and like crime and like solving things, it leads to very different types of storytelling tricks to make those formats work.
So this is an interesting point about the size of the seasons, because this has come up a lot, both in the current writer's strike and in the prior writer's strike, because it's no accident that most TV has kind of decided to go around that more consolidated miniseries route. And it's especially true in the US, where the entertainment industry is probably some of the most heavily unionized work anywhere in the world, which is really interesting to think about. But no, so Law & Order, right? So Law & Order SVU, every season is anywhere from like 22 to 26 episodes, with very, very rare exception due to production issues like a previous writer's strike or COVID or whatever. And part of the reason that most streaming services decided to move towards shorter seasons and shorter episode run times is that, one, you're not paying residuals to the people involved in it. Two, the reason most shows don't go past like a third season is that after 3 seasons is typically when production contracts get renegotiated. So if a show does well for 3 seasons, then season 4 is when everyone gets a raise, which is why most shows don't last for 4 seasons. And then 3, the other big thing here is that because everything is decided to be on a more prestige level, quote unquote, with longer episodes and shorter seasons, that means the individual staff and crew that are hired for these shows end up getting contracted for a short amount of content that takes in excess of what it would take to produce a regular season of TV. So you spend 2 years of your life making 8 episodes, but you really only get paid for that one season and those 8 episodes one time. As opposed to the way traditional TV format is structured, so you have something like 20 to 25 episodes a season. It gets syndicated because you have well over 100 episodes by the end of a run. You get periodic raises every like 3 seasons or so, depending on how the show is doing, and you get to court other jobs alongside of your TV production on this one show, because everything is designed to run on a week-to-week basis, which doesn't exist on the streaming side. And that's, among other things, that's one other big reason that the writer's strike now is happening, is because in moving the format from like a longer season to a shorter season, you have fundamentally upended in an important way how most production people and writers actually make their money. And again, to go back to the formulaic thing, part of the reason that the cop show is the bread and butter of really any TV is because you could do so much of that work so easily, so quickly, that it just allows you to do this on the side and then make money doing something else. Tons and tons of young actors and writers got their start on shows like Law and Order because they're so easy to pump out. And if you go to Columbo, the better these shows get, the more limited their run is, or the longer their production is. So if Law and Order has 20 episodes a season and each one is like 45 minutes long, an average episode of Columbo was something like 70 to 90 minutes. Like, it was more in Sherlock territory, where every episode was a movie. And they didn't keep making Columbo until they basically had a movie's worth of content for each individual episode. And so you kind of run into this problem where if the season is designed to be extremely long, then you need production timelines that are extremely short. But if production timelines are extremely short, then you have less and less opportunity to make that formula innovative. And because these kinds of shows are the bread and butter of cable television, they don't really want you to make them innovative, because they really just want them to keep getting pumped out over and over again, because the views are never going to change. Law and Order can go on forever, because it basically does the same numbers regardless of how every other show on television is doing. And so you kind of just use it as a catapult to do other things. But then if you do want to make more complicated TV, it requires either taking a deal that requires you to get paid less for more work, or doing more work on the side in addition to your regular job, because the prestige stuff isn't paying the bills.
Sucks, don't it?
It really does.
Yeah, I don't know, because like on some level, it is probably not great that these shows are just content machines and they just churn out all this stuff and no one actually really cares. Like, who has a favorite episode of Law and Order, for Christ's sake, right? Um, Steve, I swear to God, if you tell me your favorite episode of Law and Order right now,
I do, but it's more ironically, and also, like, I can't explain to you the season breaks in Law and Order. Like, Law and Order might as well be the news, right? Like, there's a new episode every week.
But, like, it is weird that, like, on some level you'd wish that the more artistically fulfilling, more groundbreaking, more, like, you know, culture-shaping shows were, you know, the thing that paid people more to work on them. And it's kind of funny that what is essentially schlop, like just fucking whatever the school lunch lady throws on your tray out of the spoon, is the thing that is more, you know, beneficial to the economy and to the individual people working behind the camera.
I mean, and I gotta tell you, man, like, there's a reason why fucking rapper Ice-T has been on the show Law and Order SVU for over 20 years. And it's because it pays the bills.
I keep forgetting that's the thing.
Yeah, man. He's been on that show since literally season 1 or 2.
Damn. That's crazy to me. Every time I think about that, I just think about the fact that my brother had, like, pictures of rappers that he put up in the closet because my mom didn't like that kind of music at first. And one of them was fucking Ice-T. And now that's the guy that, my mom doesn't like that guy's music because it's too violent or whatever. Now he's solving murders on television for 20... That's a larger part of his career than being a rapper known for being, you know, anti-establishment or whatever.
Man's got 476 SVU credits alone.
Jesus Christ. It just reminds me of that fucking episode of the Boondocks where Riley's in the backseat, or not in the backseat, in the trunk of the car with the one rapper that they kidnapped. And he's like, man, you remember Ice Cube? Guy that makes family movies? I used to have dreams about Ice Cube kidnapping me and murdering my whole family. And I still liked his music so much. The guy that makes family movies?
My favorite is when Snoop Dogg shows up on commercials with Martha Stewart, and I'm just like, do you remember when he was on trial for murder?
Yeah. It's fucking weird, man. Man, television sure softens a lot of these people's image. It's crazy.
Yeah, no, it's a very strange thing. But no,
I mean, it's funny that you say that, right? Because, like, Snoop Dogg may have been on trial for murder, but Martha Stewart actually went to prison.
He was the real badass. British television wishes it was this hardcore. But no, to Alfie, to your question, the formula is really interesting because you're right. At the end of the day, it is this sort of like an eternal catch-22 of like get paid more to do bad or get paid less to do good. And it's not even like all shows with seasons that long are necessarily bad. It's just the way cop shows in particular are kind of just churned out necessitates a certain level of like, I don't want to say shittiness, but shittiness. Even if they are like sort of the dumb fun shows that you can turn your brain off to. The 20-ish season structure of any show, I think, is a problem. You and I have talked about this a lot with something like Superman and Lois being on the CW, where like it really doesn't benefit from that style. If you watched any Arrowverse show for long enough, it's very apparent at what point the 20-plus episode runtime is just a hindrance. Comparing that to like good HBO shows that have like at most 15 episodes a season. And because of that, they're allowed to like structure the story in a way that feels a lot more urgent, where you're not necessarily running into these blocks of like, okay, what did we do this week? What did we do this week? What did we do this week? And it also like opens up a lot of people to do a short stint on a show and then go away without having to commit to like a show that long where you basically don't get any vacation between one season and the rest. But cop shows have one benefit, which is, and Ian and I were talking about this earlier, which is because they're so disposable, you kind of don't need anything extra. Like, Law and Order's turned its cast over so many times to the point where, like, if you get someone who's seen season 1 to watch season 21, which isn't even the newest season, but if you get someone to watch season 21, it's not actually going to be a hindrance to their understanding, because none of the characters that they recognize are there, with the exception of Ice-T. But the entire concept of the show is the same. Nothing has fundamentally changed. It's just we have a different captain now, and it's basically the same show.
I think that's an interesting benefit to it. And what I think, just from a writer's standpoint, that I'd like to ask you is, even from just an audience member, I guess, is, do you two prefer, when we talk about the crime show, do you like crime as in multiple crimes we solve throughout a season, or do you like the crime to solve and we really deep dive and make a narrative around this one event? Or do you like a mix between the two?
Probably a mix. I watched a lot of, what was it? Fucking Criminal Minds. And I liked when they would do, a through line, or, there's this really big killer out there that's kind of, always slipping through their fingers. I kind of like that. I liked, White Collar, where there'd be, a through line through this show of whatever fucking Neil Caffrey was trying to do that week. First it was his girlfriend, then it was fucking Mosby's pet bear or whatever. I liked the through line. But if it's just 13 episodes of trying to solve one mystery, I understand how that is probably more realistic to what an actual detective would have to do, of trying to work a long time to solve one case. But that's just fundamentally not very entertaining to me. I need stuff to grab my attention, and I need Dora the Explorer to ask me questions about what's on the screen right now. To keep me engaged. A little bit
more towards I want a different case every episode. I love True Detective. I love Fargo. Ironically, though, my least favorite episodes of White Collar are the ones that deal with the ongoing story. It's the same with stuff like Bones, or even Psych early on, when they did stuff like the Yin Yang Killer, because there again, it just kind of goes to the whole sort of disposable nature of it, where if I want a big long investment in solving one mystery, I'll just watch a David Fincher movie, something that is categorically better than 13 episodes of cable TV. If I am turning on cable TV, I'd rather just kind of have the dumb fun entertainment of one episode, one mystery. It goes to the same sort of nature of the mediums that inspired it, right? I'll read a chapter of a detective novel before bed, or a Sherlock Holmes short story before bed, or something like that. Something that doesn't require the same level of investment. And also just because I feel now, in our present culture, not saying anything about the concept as a whole, but in our present culture, our obsession with true crime is getting to the point of becoming a deteriorating force, and I think we kind of need to move past it. And we're not going to if we keep greenlighting these prestige 13 episode true crime mystery adaptations.
No, I was just curious, because I think those are kind of the big line in the sand between what we think of the flavors of crime procedural show. So I was just curious which flavor tickled the fancy of you fellas.
How about you? Do you have a preference when you do watch any of these?
For me, when I was younger, I did prefer the season arc around one central focus. But as I've gotten older, I do really tend to like the idea of the one and done. I think those are always the best episodes, regardless, even if it is about a whole single mystery. Normally the standout episode is when we just create a problem and we solve it in that episode, even if it's just part of a larger plot. And I think that just comes down from me being such a fan of Sherlock Holmes, and so many of those mysteries are short stories. And I think the longer you make a mystery, the harder it becomes to make it enthralling and engaging. The more time you give the audience, the smarter you have to be to string them along, and the kind of better you have to be at your job to keep it engaging and to stop it from being frustrating. A classic example I think we can give of this just from the show is Ian talks about, like, he'd probably be a lot more forgiving of the Batman if that was a 20-minute episode plot instead of a 3-hour movie plot. You know, like, it's just the longer that goes, the more you're going to lose people with mysteries. That's just kind of the genre and how you have to deal with it. So I do think every episode we bring in a different cast, or we bring in new challenges for our returning cast and see how they deal with it, and maybe we'll have a two-parter here and there, I think is actually a bit of a lost art form. And we've gotten worse at that, to where something that we should be making that the bread and butter of TV, the thing that the writer's strike is like kind of encouraging, is like, this is why you bring on writers to do this, just so you can have a fun episode that people can rewatch just when they catch, and they don't need any context for it, and everything you need is just in the beats. It's almost when we talk about with comics, like trade waiting, as the single issue has been lost in the same way that I think the single episode of TV is starting to go. And I'm kind of sad about that, because I'm getting more of a taste for it. It's like, oh no, there's less of it now. So that would probably be where I land on that.
It's also just like harder to write ultimately, because the formula is certainly a good guiding structure, but like, if you want your episode 465 of like fucking Chicago PD or Chicago Fire to stand out, then it can't be like any of the other 400 odd episodes of the series already. And so it does sort of encourage you to have, one, the skill to keep the characters who have been in the show for several hundred episodes consistent, while also doing something that is unique and entertaining and engaging in its own right. Because the problem with disposable TV is that since it's so abundant, if the first 20 minutes of like an episode of Psych loses you, you can just like flip the channel and watch like the last 20 minutes of an episode of Bones. And so doing it well is genuinely a talent, and it is very hard to do in a way where not only will someone watch it, but in the current streaming age, will someone binge it?
Oh god, binging shows has just become like so exhausting. I remember, like, I think everyone does it to an extent, but like, I remember when it was first really taking off, when like Netflix started their original content, and I was one of the people. I remember doing a binge of the first season of House of Cards, and I like posted my thoughts on every episode as it was going, and I just remember being like so fucking like drained by the end of the day, and I didn't even end up enjoying it that much. And it's such a weird thing that like, but that's what they want now, and I'm like, you realize this is unsustainable. That and I think we're beginning to show that people just get so sick of it. Like it's become a meme now that like Netflix cancels a show once it gets good, but I'm like, yeah, but it's because they already got everyone to binge it, and now it's all there for people to binge whenever they feel like, and it's just endless now. So why should they keep making more? I'm like, it just makes sense to stop the show. And like, honestly, thank God. So now there's less fucking shit to binge.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's a problem in a twofold way, right? Where like, people are exhausted from binging shows, but also the metric for binging as a model of success like has proved to not work. Releasing everything at once is demonstrably bad for your bottom line, and now even Netflix doesn't do that all the time because they know it doesn't work.
Mm-hmm.
Could you imagine though? Times. Could you imagine binge watching a procedural cop show? That seems like the worst thing on the planet.
I mean, I think that's why I got so exhausted with fucking Columbo as quickly as I did, because I was like, oh yeah, I'm gonna watch Columbo, and I tried to watch like 3 episodes in a row, and it was just fucking exhausting.
You really can't.
It's too long.
It's 3 90-minute movies. It's like, literally the best way to watch a show like that is the way it was originally designed, which is watch an episode a night.
Yeah, but like even then, that's going through it too fast, you know?
Yeah,
Because it's really one episode a week, and then you're waiting like a year in between and shit, right? It's crazy. That's all I got. It's crazy.
It do be crazy. Something I guess we should talk about specifically because it's us three and how we got robbed. And maybe it was a blessing, but as time goes on, I still think we land on the situation that we got robbed. And it might be our time to just fix it and pitch it ourselves as what the hell happened to our Gotham Central crime procedural show?
Oh, God.
Like, come on, guys. Like, what? Come on. Come on.
There is history. There's history to this, because I've listened to Ed Brubaker talk about it quite a bit. So one thing you gotta understand about Gotham Central is no one ever wanted it to succeed, including DC Comics when they were publishing Gotham Central. This actually goes all the way back to when they were pitching Gotham Central. Brubaker couldn't get the pitch to go through, and then he was at a dinner with some like higher up at DC, and like he sketched the logo out and showed it to her, and then she was like, "Why aren't we publishing this?" And that's how we got it published. Dan Didio did not want Michael Lark to be drawing that book, so like he purposely fucked with his life and made his job harder while he was on Gotham Central, which Didio couldn't, or which Lark couldn't afford to do because he just had a kid at the time. So he jumped ship to go work for Marvel. Brubaker basically bailed right around the same time Margot Lark did, and it left Greg Rucka to do most of the running for that. For a really long time, the reprints of the book weren't accurate to what Brubaker and Rucka wanted. The trades, up until the most recent omnibus that just came out last year, the Joker story had an entire page that had the wrong art. And no one just cared to fix it until just recently. And the only reason they did is because Brubaker reached out when he found out they were reprinting it so that he could try and get it fixed. Making a Gotham Central show has been in discussion for a really long fucking time. The guy who made Gotham basically said that that's what he was making up until the very, very last minute when it got changed to the concept of a young Bruce Wayne, which is why that first season of that show feels so strange.
I hate it so much.
When Matt Reeves started talking about all the Arkham spinoffs, some executive or some producer that Brubaker knows that's in the room with the Batman people talked to him about it, and the guy basically told Brubaker verbatim that they know Gotham Central is the pitch, but they are intentionally avoiding anything that seems like Gotham Central so they don't have to pay the writers for it. So it's never happening.
Steve. Why is DC on television so allergic to doing a Superman show that's about Superman and a Batman show that is about Batman?
Because those are film characters, silly, and they need to be on the big screen. Never mind the fact that Superman hasn't had a solo movie in 10 years, but that's a film character, Ian. He needs to be on film.
Never mind the fact that Batman's popularity comes from being a successful TV character.
That's what I'm saying. It's hilarious because like you look at the generation of creators that came into Batman from the 70s, 80s, and 90s, and it's all because they love 66. And you look at the generation of creators that came into Batman from the 90s, 2000s, and 10s, and it's all because of Batman the animated series. Like no one actually reads the comics or the movies for their inspiration.
I don't know, man. I mean, I guess technically we do have a Superman show that is airing and is actually about Superman and his two sons.
It's pretty good too.
Yeah. Is it Alfie? Is it pretty good?
Season 1 is not bad. Season 2 is trash. Season 3 is not bad.
I haven't watched any of Season 3. Season 1 was not bad, though. They got a good season out of it. Season 2 was... I don't even know what happened there, but it did. But my argument against that is actually to Ian's point, is this is still not a show about Superman. This is a family drama that has an obligatory Superman scene. per episode. Like, it's not actually about Superman. He himself doesn't go on arcs. It's about other supporting characters, and that's fine for a show. Like, that's whatever. But I think it does support Ian's point of they just will not make a show about that character, to the point where Tyler Hoechlin went on Twitter and was praising the fact that, oh yes, the latest episode in Superman and Lois Season 3 actually had no Superman. We've been trying to do that for a while. It's like, guys, can you, like, at least pretend that you want to have him in the suit? Like, can you at least, like, pretend that's a thing?
To be fair, Season 3 has been more about Clark going on an arc than the first 2 seasons. Because the big thing in Season 3, and I'll spoil it because I know Ian's not going to watch it anytime soon, but the big thing in Season 3 is that Lois develops breast cancer, and so she's undergoing treatment for it, and that's like essentially the whole arc of the season. I'm
going to blame Superman for it.
Huh?
I'm blaming him. 100% X-rayed those titties.
So the show's actually done a not awful, I'm not saying good, but a not awful job of trying to tell a story about that in a way that's actually kind of interesting and mature. And Superman himself is actually the person who seems to be going on more of the arc here than anyone else, because the idea of the show really seems to be, if Superman is a constant force for positivity and optimistic thinking, sometimes you literally just can't have that in your life. And it does not help the situation. And his need to present that persona can sometimes hurt the people he's trying to help. There's a whole, not a great episode, but an interesting episode nonetheless, where Lois is trying to get him to, like, talk about a will, and he'll just keep saying, like, no, don't worry, you're going to be fine, you're going to be great, you're going to beat this. And she's like, no, that's not the point. The point is that you need to be prepared in case I don't. And he doesn't get that. And it's actually really interesting to watch that part of the story unfold.
That is a better picture than I'd seen. That does sound interesting. I do like that concept. But again, I haven't seen anything. So I've seen, like, clips on Twitter occasionally, but I can't comment besides that, just on the first 2 seasons. But that does sound better, and I think that goes to the procedural nature of these things, of how you challenge your characters outside of doing the thing they're doing is always interesting. Like, how do you make a Sherlock Holmes show where the problem isn't him being Sherlock Holmes and solving mysteries? He's good at that. There's the emotional baggage, etc. And I think that's the case for a lot of these detective shows. Is after a while, the longer they go on, the more it has to be about them as people, and the crimes kind of take a backseat. And that can be a necessity, and that can be like a shame sometimes, depending on how it's executed.
Or in the case of the longer they run, they just cycle through the cast so often where they never feel the need to have to do that. That's
true also. That's sort of a approach.
In the middle era of SVU, there was after the bald guy that everyone loves left Law and Order, they replaced Benson's partner with this, like, young Italian guy whose cop name was Nick, but I can't remember the actual name of the character or the actor or anything. But Nick was basically like this young hothead character, and the whole sort of idea was we replaced the sort of like Mulder and Scully duo style characters with someone who is a veteran and someone who is a young hothead. And that dynamic lasted for a little while, and over the course of, like, his 3 or 4 seasons on the show, he kind of, like, tempered out until his final episode, where he apparently didn't temper out at all, got into a shootout and busted his knee, and then they wrote him off the show. And clearly they learned nothing, and then they just replaced him with someone else.
Nice. I don't know. I think we're kind of just circling around the topic a lot now, which means we're probably just done with it. I don't think there's any, like, dramatic conclusions to come to in this one. It's just, it is comfort food. It is just a fun, like, place to play around and experiment with stuff and just kind of do whatever you want. And there's really, because it's just so fundamental to, like, the backbone of old television, there's really very little you could do wrong on a cop show, so it was just kind of fun to do whatever. And I liked it. I don't know. I like that formula. I grew up on it, and I recently kind of got back into it a little bit. I don't know. It's just that's basically what Ian topics are on Geeky Gentlemen. This is something I've been thinking about lately. Let's discuss it. So that's what I got for you. Whose turn would it be to pick something for next week?
Alfie's.
It would be mine, yeah.
Okay, Alfie, you can do discussion or a review. It's up to you.
Do I want to do a discussion or a review? Let's do a...
Do a review of something you've never seen before.
A review of something I've never seen before.
Yeah. Like, you've not got any preconceived notions about it. You just, like, you've heard of this thing, you had no interest in it, you decided not to watch it, but now you're going to review it for Geeky Gentleman. You don't have to do that. I'm just throwing that out.
No, that's an interesting idea. I'm trying to think of something that's on the list for that, because I do have a lot of those that I'd want to check out. I'll consult with the missus and get back to you on that one later tonight, if that's good. Just because there are movies I can pick from for that.
Okay, fair enough. I didn't mean to hijack your thing. He seems like he's trying to think of something, so I'm like, fucking do this.
You're all good. That's a good idea.
Geeky Gentleman is great for trying to get the things you always say you were going to get to and you never have time for. And the way you do that is by forcing two other people to get to them first.
Yep.
There you go. That's the core behind it.
What? Ian,
This show's
you've never
been
read
on
this
for
comic?
10
I'm picking
years.
it for a review.
This show's been on for 10 years. I mean, okay, Steve, then your challenge is to pick fucking Kingdom Come, because I've started that book at least 12 times and never gotten...
It sucks interestingly, though. I wouldn't mind talking about Kingdom Come one day.
I wrote a Comic Book Herald piece about how Kingdom Come is really problematic, but really fun to talk about.
Okay. Anyway. Alright, well, that'll do it for this week's episode of Geeky Gentlemen. Everyone, thank you so much for watching. I'm the Philosopher.
I am the champion of the oppressed.
And I'm gonna go watch White Collar, because I learned nothing.
And we are your Geeky Gentlemen, and we will be discussing things. Because we're not here to fuck spiders.